Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan, MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 30th of September 2024. This is a two-day update for the geopolitics topics that I normally cover with regard to the war in Ukraine. So a fair bit to talk about, but a lot of it's mainly to do with the Austrian elections that have just taken place. So Austria's far-right Freedom Party has been victorious in national elections. The Freedom Party chief Herbert Kickl, 55, is considered a close ally of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He's promised Austrians to build an impregnable fortress Austria against migrants to restore their security, prosperity and peace. He also said he would put an end to Ukraine's ambitions to join the European Union, claiming it poses a threat to European agriculture and promising to block further talks with Kiev. So that's where this guy is. He advocates for lifting sanctions on Russia because, that's what the European far right do. Lifting sanctions. And by the way, I'm going to make a fairly controversial claim here, and a lot of you that like him might not like this, but if you look at all the policies, isolationism, deporting 15 million migrants, completely closing the border, so on and so forth. Look at all those really super conservative ideas like anti-abortion, anti-choice, I would say, etc., etc. I would actually say that Trump errs on the far right. And who are his mates? So Viktor Orban is a guy that he says he most admires in Europe. So Viktor Orban is an autocrat wannabe. And you've got all the people that look up to Trump are people like Kickl, people like Orban, Robert Fico, etc., etc. This populist right is very much in line with the sort of agenda that we are seeing proposed by Trump. You heard I did that video last night where he's talking about immigrants coming into your house and cutting your throats. So anyway, there's a lot of rhetoric that I would say that is pretty much far right, and so I don't have a problem with suggesting that because I think it's far more justifiable. Now you might go up in arms. I don't support the far right. You might not be far right yourself, but in supporting someone who proposes far right ideology, it's difficult to parse that. A far right party won the national elections in Austria for the first time since World War II. They advocate for lifting sanctions on Russia. Interestingly, what Trump is advocating. Previous to his meeting with Zelensky, he was advocating for lifting sanctions on Russia, as mentioned at one of his sort of town hall-y type things, and ending support for Ukraine, which again Trump had suggested too. Now you've got Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, and Serbia, all in this sort of big area here of, well, I guess anti-EU. The FPO, the Freedom Party, is like a Eurosceptic, pro-Russia, far-right party. That you see the ultra-nationalists of Serbia, similar to that. Fidesz party in Hungary, similar to that. And Robert Fico, although he was a populist leftist, he's gone into coalition with the extreme right and another party, but he has his policies have moved to the right as well. So I would say that he is populist right now, Robert Fico. So when you look at the reaction to the Austrian elections, and it's quite worrying because obviously there's hallmarks of the 1930s and the Austrian far right. What was that other Austrian leader who was on the far right? I wonder what his name was. The sort of articles we can see here on The Guardian, which is admittedly a left-leaning paper. Geert Wilders from the Netherlands, who's seen as the Dutch Trump because of his hair and his approach to immigration, etc., etc. And Viktor Orban congratulate Austria's far-right Freedom Party on poll success. Austrian parties to begin talks on forming a government after far-right win. It finishes first in the election. And this is the article which I found fascinating. We're going to actually read this whole article. How did the far right win in Austria? And to understand, look to its global networks. Now, this is entirely consonant with everything I've been speaking to you about over the last couple of years, which is the influence of parties outside of a country or entities outside of countries influencing political operations and political organizations and movements in any given country. So you have the influence of Russia, you have the influence of, so on and so forth. And actually, some years ago, you had Steve Bannon, after he sort of came out of his White House position, went around Europe, geeing up the populist right and forming these networks within Europe. So Steve Bannon has a lot to answer for, I would argue. Anyway, Julia Ebner here says the Freedom Party hasn't only harnessed discontent at home, it is drawing on once fringe ideas that spread throughout around the world. So I'm going to read this all. We will, quote, we will kick upwards and clamp down on those who don't mean well for us, said Herbert Kickl in May 2023. Under Kickl's leadership, the Austrian Freedom Party, FPO, has scored its biggest election victory since it was founded in 1956 by Anton Rheintaler, an Austrian Nazi who had served as a lieutenant general in the SS. So that's your kind of, there's your genesis. Not only is the FPO now more popular than ever, it is also at the height of its radicalism. The FPO's victory in Sunday's national elections has been celebrated by far-right movements and influencers across Europe. No wonder. It demonstrates how successful they have been at normalizing and internationalizing their extreme ideologies, conspiracy myths, and policy proposals. Many of the FPO's ideas have been inspired by Generation Identity, a pan-European white nativist movement that has its roots in France and is particularly strong in Austria. In a post-election live stream to his followers, the movement's Austrian leader, Martin Sellner, celebrated the FPO win as, quote, a dream result. He has been one of the most influential proponents of the term re-migration, the policy of mass deportation of people with a migration background, which had its first spike on social media following the 2014 extreme right meetup in France. This is where you then look back to Trump and say, you're wanting to relocate 15 million illegal migrants. Now, you can argue there's a difference, there's a nuance there between people with a migration background and illegal immigrants. And you could argue, actually, illegal immigrants need to be not in the country because they are there illegally, etc., etc. But there are definite shadows going on here, reflections going on here, I think. Anyway. 10 years later, the FPO is far from the only far-right political party that has embraced the concept. Germany's AfD party used remigration as part of its campaigns for regional elections in Saxony and Thuringia on the 1st of September, and Donald Trump recently called for remigration in a, quote, remigration, in a post about, quote, illegal immigrants on Twitter. Even though Sellner communicated with received a donation from the Christchurch shooter, who later killed 51 people in 2 consecutive mosque attacks in New Zealand in 2019, Kickl has since described the identitarian movement as a project worthy of support, which should be viewed as an NGO from the right. A year before the Christchurch attack, Sellner wrote to me in a direct message on Twitter, quote, I don't think that my videos and speeches incite violence. The anger is there in any case, and I think it has its material basis. Immigration is only one of the FPO's controversial campaign topics. COVID conspiracy myths, climate change denial, anti-feminism, and anti-LGBTQ+ discourse are other features of the party's branding. The FPO Member of Parliament, Michael Gruber, has recently shared an election campaign video on Instagram that showed him throwing a rainbow flag in a bin with the tagline "Cleaning up for Austria." So this is really typical. You get the anti-minorities, whether it be sexuality, race, ethnicity, religion as well, with kind of anti-Islam, anti-feminism, anti-climate change. I mean, goodness me, anti-COVID. The idea that there are all these COVID conspiracies, etc., etc. There seem to be these coalescing around these dubious ideas. With Kickl using dog whistles such as climate communism and WHO, as in World Health Organization, dictatorship, the FPO has been able to expand its support base among conspiracy theorists and COVID deniers. What does Kickl mean by kicking upwards? For example, he promised to become the FPO chancellor who won't bow down to the EU, NATO, and the WHO. So these intranational organizations that we need to keep things ticking around the world, there's this fragmentation of society with this anti-establishment move. And I think Trumpism is an anti-establishment move, essentially. It's like, we want to screw you, NATO. We don't want to be friends with the EU. We want to be isolationists. We're going to retreat from the world. We're going to say no to international organizations. And there you go. And I think that anti-establishment move is really dangerous, because we only solve global problems with global solutions. I'm very much a globalist and internationalist, because I think that's the only way the only way forward for humanity, really. And it's not saying it's easy and not without challenges, etc., etc. In the New Year's speech, this is Kickel, spoke of his long wanted list, which includes centrist politicians from whom he refers to as politicians of the system Politica, and whom he accuses of treason against the people, Volksverrat, two terms known for their use by Adolf Hitler. A key to FPO's success has been the growing landscape of alternative, hyper-biased and conspiratorial news outlets that are formed around the party of its sympathizers. And this is what I talk about, disinformation, coming from abroad, but also being perpetrated inside with these very extreme news organizations that are happy to pump out things that are of dubious rational justification. I would throw personally, and of course you're gonna go, oh, of course, JP, but I'd just throw Newsmax and OANN with those in the US personally, because they would be the sorts of organizations that would spin those sort of fabrications. Okay, so where were we? It's in the run-up to the election, a series of false claims spread in a chain reaction across these alternative media websites and social media channels such as Telegram. Reports, for example, were circulated claiming that the deep state wanted to steal the FPO's victory, or that centrist parties were planning to reintroduce mandatory vaccinations after the elections. Alf One, a particularly influential new right-wing channel, has aired ideas of, quote, vaccine mass extermination and, quote, a deadly transhumanist agenda. And transhumanist doesn't mean trans. Transhumanist is like taking humanity onwards by using technology, etc., etc. I had an interview of the transhumanist party of the US that you can check on my other channel, actually. The channel was the first outlet to feature an appearance by Kickel on Sunday night after the election victory. The FPO's historic victory not only poses a risk to Austria's minorities, independent media outlets, scientific community, and democratic institutions, it also has a potential to significantly strengthen the far right in Europe and internationally. Alice Wider of the German AfD, Marine Le Pen of the French National Rally, and Geert Wilders of the Dutch Freedom Party all enthusiastically congratulated the FPO. Quote, in the Netherlands, Hungary, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Portugal, Sweden, France, Spain, Czech Republic, and today Austria, we are winning, times are changing, commented Wilders on Twitter. And of course, this is to talk to the sweep of the far right across Europe in many different contexts. Now, I know the EU elections luckily saw the centre-right hold on to sway in Europe, but the far right is nipping at the heels. Despite the far right populists' focus on ultra-nationalism, their own networks are remarkably transnational. This global anti-globalism is not the only inconsistency in the far right's ideology. If the stakes weren't so high, it would be amusing that the FPO is criticising the corrupt mainstream media, while they're the ones who are caught wanting to sell Austria's largest newspaper, Kronenzeitung, to a Russian investor to push pro-FPO messaging in 2017. In addition, while Kickel publicly described the COVID vaccinations as a genetic engineering experiment, he was rumoured to have been secretly vaccinated against COVID, which he still denies. For a party that ordered a raid of the country's intelligence agency BVT in 2018 and advocates policies that fundamentally contradict the pillars of Austrian constitution, it also requires a lot of audacity to describe all other parties as anti-democratic. As I argued in The Guardian last year, extremism has leaked into mainstream politics. With the global rise of an increasingly emboldened far right, it is more important than ever that other parties show that they are honest with their voters and can reliably translate words into action. We need a new generation of boundary-crossing leaders that can offer effective but non-hateful solutions to the various sources of anger in previously underrepresented population groups. They must be capable of reversing the cumulative radicalization that is threatening to break our democracies. And that's Julia Ebner, who's an Austrian academic and author who leads the Violent Extremism Lab at the University of Oxford's Centre for the Study of Social Cohesion. So I think it's just really worth reading that. I'm deeply worried at this kind of movement. Now, talking about immigration, and that's not to say there aren't immigration issues and worries around Europe, and particularly around Europe, where you have rich nations that are seen as the place to go with decent welfare networks. And with climate change is a great mover of people. You're going to have migration, increased migration from climate change, from war zones. You've got Syria, you've got the Middle East now going off on one, you've got Lebanon. People are becoming refugees from Lebanon to Syria, which is like a war zone with all these different entities fighting there. It's just absolutely crazy. You've got Ukraine, obviously. This is a really worrying part of human history at the moment, and mass migrations are something that will need to be dealt with. And the problem is, if centrist parties and left-leaning parties don't have a robust approach to migration, then it will be weaponized by the right. Or you will just see a rise in the right, a rise in the far right, and that's what we're seeing, and that is a reflection of the challenges of movements of people. How do you do that though in a humane and compassionate way that remains robust with everyone's best intentions at heart? Difficult. Now we have this is Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor. So someone else saying Russia is totally off the hinges. Meanwhile, in Russia, emboldened by Trump's rhetoric, state TV's experts urge Moscow not to stop at Ukraine and target Poland next. They fondly reminisce about taking Bialystok in 1939 when the Soviet Union attacked Poland in alliance with Nazi Germany. You're starting to see all sorts of crazy rhetoric on Russian national state television. In Budapest, one-on-one talks between Zbiha, so this is good news, the new Ukrainian foreign minister, and Szijjarto, so is it Peter Szijjarto, the Hungarian foreign minister, so Hungary, one of those far-right countries I was talking, well, at least the Fidesz party, although there is the upstart party with, is it again Peter Magyar in Hungary doing really well at the moment. Be interested to see where they're trying to be everything to everyone, and he was originally in the Fidesz party himself, so it's interesting to see where they're going to politically sit. But it's good to see Zbiha and Szijjarto together here, so they are meeting. A press statement's planned following the meeting. I haven't heard anything since. And then we have Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister. He is now due to take up Jens Stoltenberg's position as Secretary General of NATO. They anticipate Rutte will focus on rallying support for Ukraine, ensuring unity within the alliance, addressing Eastern European allies' demands for increased security. And obviously, it's going to be Hungary and possibly Turkey, but mainly Hungary. Hungary and Slovakia, really, the issues in NATO. Austria are a neutral country, so I'm pretty sure they're not in NATO. Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković stated that Putin has unintentionally become the biggest catalyst for the expansion of the European Union. And this is absolutely true, and it's the same can be said for NATO. His 2022 invasion of Ukraine has driven more countries to seek EU membership. Absolutely. Now, the insider, so Russian exiled people like Colby Badwa, write for, I think Michael Weiss as well, and others write for the insider. They've obtained documents drawn following Navalny's death. So Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader who was imprisoned, poisoned, and then went back to Russia and was imprisoned. And then he died in prison. And the Russians claimed it was he had a heart attack or something. But now there are leaked documents coming out that obtained documents drawn following Navalny's death omit acute stomach pain, hint at possible poisoning. The initial documents detail moments before Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's death. And so the idea is, according to the papers signed by investigator Alexander Voropayev, Navalny felt sick, fell to the floor, and called for help, saying that he felt severe stomach pain and began to vomit. I'm not sure omit's the right word there, but admit possibly. So in other words, it wasn't a heart problem, it was a poisoning problem, pretty much. And there you go. Who knew? Now, it's like these guys are listening to my channel, because how long have I been saying we should have been taking the red lines to Russia? We should say, if you do this, then we will allow Ukraine to use long-range munitions into Russia. But instead, we let Russia dictate to Ukraine the red lines, and really to the West. We are ceding power, diplomatic power, to the Russians. Glasnost Gone says spot on from this Politico article. The West should set its own red lines. Tell Putin, if you bomb one more civilian building, then you shouldn't be surprised if, say, we deliver Taurus cruise missiles, or the US allows Ukraine to strike military targets in Russia. Also works for sanctions. Yes. I don't. Why does it take some rando on YouTube to say this stuff and then wait 6 months plus for other people to go, oh yeah, we should do this in some mainstream media? I mean, that's good. I agree. Totally brilliant. But what the hell are our diplomats doing? What the hell are politicians doing and military strategists doing? If, like, some douche like me can come up with ideas that aren't exactly genius, like, it's obvious. It does me nothing. Jay in Kiev says, page 21 of the US indictment outlining Russia's disinformation blitz, so Tenet Media, all that stuff that I talked about the other week, on America, clearly states that the number one directive from Putin's presidential administration to his propaganda behemoth is to create nuclear psychosis in America. So nuclear psychosis being like a paralysis, or being like thinking, panicking, and being obsessed with the whole escalation discussion, so that you create a kind of psychosis over the whole situation and end up really playing into exactly what Russia want. They want to create a nuclear psychosis, and that's exactly what has happened. Now, convincing Americans that Putin will nuke everyone has been the key to paralyzing US foreign policy. And yet it's written in their own indictment, in the US indictment, that this is what the US is trying to do. And yet you look up at the government above, and you're like, oh yeah, and this is what they've done. This is what they're trying to do, and this is what they've done. Read your own documentation, guys. Biden, though, on the other hand, is finally using the right language on Ukraine.
Mr. President, welcome back to the White House. Welcome back to the Oval Office. You shared a preview of your plan to win this war, and that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. And that's why today I'm proud to announce a new $2.4 billion package of security assistance. We look ahead to help Ukraine succeed in the long term. We said at the Washington summit, we have to support Ukraine in its path to membership to both the EU and to NATO.
So that's interesting. So Biden's now admitting NATO, which is something he'd shied away from before.
These actions, we make it clear we stand with Ukraine now and in the future.
Thank you for the unwavering bipartisan support, and to all American people. Together, we have to win, and we will win. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. President Biden said, and his words in his tweet are, Ukraine will win this war. And that's not something you've heard from the Republicans at the top of the ticket. You've not heard that from JD Vance, and you've not heard that from Donald Trump. This is really freaking important. You've heard this now from Biden, and you've heard it from Kamala Harris as well. There appears to be only one party who's interested in Ukraine actually winning. Otherwise, from Trump, it's just, we want a deal that's fair to both sides. Really? That kind of both sidesism again? And the United States will continue to stand beside them every step of the way. That's really important rhetoric there. And then here we have to say, we got Kamala Harris as well there with Zelensky. Good optics there of these guys being together, working in harmony and unison. But of course, the proof of the pudding's in the tasting, and that tasting is going to be the sweet taste of a storm shadow whacking into an airbase in Russia, or an ATACMS spreading cluster munitions over a bunch of airplanes in Russia. So good optics and actually the right thing. But, as Jay in Kiev says, now he needs to let them win. So follow that up with actions. And yeah, $8 billion worth of assistance is obviously, brilliant. Right, Zelensky says Putin is afraid to use nuclear weapons because he loves his life. Russia's attack on Zaporizhzhia. So that's something else. So there's been this interview, I think, I can't remember where he gave it, Zelensky, where he's been talking about how he's talking to this anti-escalation movement and discussing how Putin won't use nukes. He's too afraid because he likes his life. And yeah, that is a decent argument. It's the obvious argument is one that we often don't hear enough. which is that we always go, oh, he's going to press the red button. Not that that's a singular thing that he could do, but you get my point. He's going to press a red button, so we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, rather than thinking, what's in it for him to do that? Why would he do that? You can say, oh, yeah, they shot some missiles into an airbase in Russia, but will that really make him do that? Like, what does he stand to gain? There is no gaining, so he won't do it. I mean, we need to think of it more in those terms. And that's kind of what Zelensky was talking to. Now, the White House has defied congressional mandate on Ukraine aid disclosure. The Biden administration has classified its Ukraine aid strategy document contrary to congressional requirements for public disclosure, raising GOP criticism. So you might get some Republicans going, hang on, why are you keeping this kind of, you got the victory plan from the Ukrainians, why is this kind of plan on our aid to Ukraine going forward being classified? What's going on there? So that's an interesting development. Chris Coons, who's a Connecticut Democrat, I think, on Fox News on Sunday. I only include this because it's all about being on Fox News. For me, it's about reaching those Republican-leaning voters that watch Fox News.
Well, were you encouraged by the meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky? Because they came out of it and seemed that they had met, had some kind of meeting of the minds, that they heard each other. I mean, President Trump said, it hasn't changed where he is overall on trying to get this thing ended. But even President Zelensky, and he talked with our Griff Jenkins too, sounded like he felt like it was a good meeting.
I'm glad they met. It's important that there be conversations between President Zelensky and both Republican and Democratic leaders of our nation and candidates to be the next president of our nation. But in the clip that you're showing right now, President Trump said, I'm a very good friend of Putin's. And you could see Zelensky sort of stiffen up and go, well, I hope you're a better friend of Ukraine than you are a friend of Russia under Putin.
Absolutely.
So it was a strikingly awkward moment. Yeah. Putin is a war criminal. Putin has carried out horrific attacks in Ukraine.
Yes.
We should not have a president of the United States saying that he is seeking to be a better friend of Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Okay.
100%. And, I'm more and more wearing my heart on my sleeve, politically speaking, with regard to Trump, because on Ukraine, he's just wrong and he's positioning the US incorrectly in cozying up to these dictators around the world. Now, you're starting to hear this as well. I wish North Carolina, so you've had the Hurricane Helene in the US wreaking havoc, right, which is terrible. But you've got the old classic, and this happened last time, remember, where was it in Hawaii? I wish North Carolina was as important as Ukraine, says Emma Jo Morris. Ugh. So this is a false dichotomy, which I write right here. It's a false dichotomy, which is it's not one or the other. You can have both, right? You're presenting a false dichotomy, an either or. But also, it's kind of ridiculous too, because that money is not a zero-sum game. So it's not like the money that goes to Ukraine is taken out of money that goes to like FEMA or to these disaster areas. Now, as many people have said, how do out-of-date Humvees and military equipment help North Carolina? What are you going to do with air defense or artillery shells? Please explain how old weapons and ammo will help North Carolina. Can you explain how 30-year-old anti-aircraft system would help? Russia's war is a choice. Ukraine's defense is a necessity. To look away would be morally wrong and fiscally disastrous. Billions to support Ukraine largely spent in the USA now, or trillions in costs later if Russia profits from aggression. Stop manipulating your followers. And so on and so forth. But it's great to see people absolutely just go, no, you don't know what you're talking about. So I say this because many of you will come across this argument. Some of you might have used it, right? It is not a good argument. It is not it is a false dichotomy. It is not a zero-sum game. It is not an either-or. It is a both and. Both are important. And, funding for FEMA is a separate funding strain than money that goes to USAI or Presidential Drawdown Authority or Department of Defense spending, full stop. So, right, the USA, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, and the EU, for the first time ever, have published joint guidance for industry on preventing evasion of the export controls and sanctions imposed on Russia. This is brilliant. This is what you want. Get together, sort this out, close the loopholes, work together. This is exactly what I was saying earlier. For global problems, you have to have global solutions, and going to an increasing isolationism is not cool. But that's exactly where countries like Austria and movements like, I think, MAGA movement would have us go, which is become little Englanders, little Austrianers, little Americaners, or whatever you want to call it. Go into yourself and say, sorry about that, rest of the world, we're just going to hang out together here. And of course, that would just play into the hands of those who want to take over, take that power away from others. Oh no, I can't help, I'm just cowering in the corner of my own existence here. Okay, Russia has increased its 2025 defense budget to 140 billion. I've reported on this recently, but 140 billion dollars. The Institute for the Study of War suggests that the Kremlin may be wary of war fatigue among the Russian population and attempts to maintain public support by highlighting attention to social projects. So they're also saying, "Oh, look what we're doing over here. Look, shiny things. Oh, new hospital." Meanwhile, they're spanking pretty much everything else on the war. And they're obviously very cognizant of a population that's probably teetering on being pretty unhappy with all this money being spent on the war, and doing something about it, maybe. Now, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, has arrived in Iran. So we've seen Shoigu go to Iran and to North Korea, and to Iran and North Korea. And we've seen now the Prime Minister go to Iran. I wonder why. Russian propagandists reported that Mishustin planned to discuss a whole range of Russian-Iranian cooperation in trade, economic, cultural, and humanitarian fields, or should that be military fields? Another arms supply negotiations, says Nexter. Yeah, I think so. And former Ukrainian MP and collaborator Oleg Tsarev complains that China, so this is a pro-Russian, this is a Russian collaborator, saying that China is not actually an ally of Russia, but is simply exploiting it by buying resources at extremely low prices. Do you know what? 100% agree. That is exactly right. Yeah, it's very transactional, that relationship, and I don't think for a minute that there's any deeper ideology involved, any kind of commonality of ideology. Right, I love this. This is Zelensky. I do like a bit of Zelensky. You know, he's had the toughest job in the world, really, but he's done a remarkable job. Even, you know, everyone's going to make bad decisions. I'm sure he's made some bad decisions that will come out in a light, or that you already know about. But on the whole, he's an insanely hardworking guy. But this is a really healthy nationalism. So we talked about ultranationalism earlier. I talked, when I did my talk with Tom Williamson on the flags, on vexology, we were talking about the Ukrainian flag, and it's one of those flags that has just an overwhelmingly positive vibe to it. So the type of, interestingly, psychologically, the type of yellow and the type of blue are associated with real positive vibes. But also, it's a sort of flag that you see around. And like the Union flag in the UK has got this interesting history where it was involved, you could argue, with colonialism. Then it was our national pride. Then it split off into the Union, into the St George's Cross for England, and that's become this kind of football hooliganism. And then the Union flag got involved with far right movements and the British National Party and stuff like that, and it went through a bit of a period of like, oh, it doesn't have that feel that it used to have, and now it's sort of coming back to be more acceptable again. We've had lots of royal jubilees and etc., and it's trying to get back to being this kind of unifying flag, which is positive. But most flags get deeply involved with the political winds in a country, and will have different feelings. My feeling of the Ukrainian flag is it's just a really positive flag. It sounds a weird thing to say. And his form of nationalism there, just looking up at his flag and just like, yeah, that's brilliant. Awesome. When you see national colours and support of your country abroad, I love this guy, and I don't give a damn how you tried to drag him through the mud for loving and fighting for his country. I just love that. Just nice little bit there. And an endorsement here. So I know she's maybe a bit over now. She's not like down with the kids as cool as she maybe was 10 years ago. But at 5 concerts in Las Vegas, American singer Katy Perry called on the stage to make a noise for Ukraine and F Putin, which is really cool. That's excellent. I don't want to get a copyright infringement for music there, but that's really cool, Katy Perry. Nice one. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. I hope that was of interest. I know I'm going to have ruffled a lot of feathers with my accusations about the far right here, but I am deeply disturbed, and it's about making these connections and understanding the connections between countries when you have movements succeeding. It is no surprise that certain people clamour to congratulate certain leaders when they win, and that happens both ways, right? But there are these networks of influence, and that Russia is, well, we already know that Russia is heavily behind wanting, say, Trump to win in the US, wanting FPO to win in Austria, the AfD to win in Germany, Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National in France, Vox in Spain. These are the movements, the Confederation, whatever they're called, in Poland. These are the movements that Russia are behind. And I always think, well, whoever Russia back, truly back, like properly back, is who I'm not going to be supporting. I think that's a pretty good guide to whatever Putin says. Go for the opposite. And so I worry about the movements around the world towards dangerous ideologies, and I could think about my audience and try and curtail what I say to try and keep a bit as big an audience as possible. And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to be honest with worrying about the rise of the far right. And there it is. And this win in Austria is another kick in the shins for someone like me. I think this is dangerous, and we seem to be moving inexorably in one direction with a couple of odd movements elsewhere. So Labour Party in the UK was interesting, but actually the reason why Labour got in power so successfully, so many MPs, is precisely because of a populist right party cutting the vote in two on the right. So on the one hand, you could say, "Oh, well, look at that. That's bucking the trend." You could argue actually it was as a direct result of that trend with the first pass, because in the UK, interestingly, like, I believe we should not have first past the post voting. We should have proportional representation, but proportional representation would have allowed a huge number of MPs from the right from the far right in, I would argue, as many of those reform. I know some people support reform, but actually, if you look at what their MPs were advocating for, actually it's exactly what the Austrian FPO are on about. So we were saved, in a sense, I would argue, by first past the post, even though I think it's non-representative and it is unfair. And actually, if we had a fair electoral system, those views would be represented in our country. So anyway, that's my tuppence. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.